The first time I saw this tiny electric car, I laughed. Honestly, I thought it was a joke. It looked smaller than a Mini Cooper, cheaper than most motorcycles, and almost too simple to be called a real car. Online, people describe vehicles like this as golf carts with doors, toy cars, or plastic boxes on wheels. Some even wonder how they could possibly be legal on public roads. Then I heard something even harder to believe. Some versions sell in China for around $3,000, and in certain local markets, even less. A real electric car, for about the price of a premium smartphone. That completely contradicted everything I thought I knew about electric vehicles. For years, we've been told that electric cars are expensive because batteries are expensive. More technology, more electronics, higher production costs. That's why many new electric cars in America still cost $40,000, $50,000, even $60,000. So how could another country keep producing electric cars for only a fraction of that price? At first, I assumed there had to be a catch. Maybe they were unsafe. Maybe they barely worked. Maybe they weren't really cars at all. Instead of arguing with strangers online, I decided to go and see them for myself. I wasn't looking for the cheapest car. I wasn't trying to review another electric vehicle. I wanted to answer a much bigger question. Who keeps building these tiny cars? Who actually buys them? Why are millions of them appearing across China? And perhaps the biggest mystery of all, why has the rest of the world struggled to build anything similar? These tiny electric cars through exhibitions, neighborhoods, factories, and even across the Pacific Ocean. The more I investigated, the less this story became about one cheap little car. Instead, it slowly became a story about something almost invisible, a manufacturing system that most people never notice, even though it's hiding in plain sight. Walking into the exhibition hall, the first thing I noticed wasn't the technology. It was the laughter. Rows of tiny electric vehicles filled the hall. Mini pickup trucks, compact delivery vans, neighborhood commuters, three-wheel utility vehicles. Almost every foreign visitor reacted the same way. Phones came out, people smiled. Some pointed at the smallest cars and laughed. You could almost hear the same questions repeating again and again. Is that really a car? Who would actually buy something like this? Those reactions felt familiar, because only a few days earlier, I would have asked exactly the same questions. Then someone opened the door of a Wuling Hongguang Mini EV. One person climbed inside, then another, then another. Finally, 4 adults were sitting inside one of the smallest electric cars I had ever seen. Nobody argued. Nobody tried to convince anyone. The evidence was right in front of us. The doors closed normally, the seats worked, the cabin looked small, but surprisingly usable. The laughter began to fade, not because anyone had explained anything, but because reality had quietly replaced assumption. The surprises kept coming. The air conditioner switched on, a touchscreen lit up across the dashboard. The steering wheel had multifunction controls. Driver and passenger airbags were already included. Even auto hold appeared on the equipment list. One by one, every feature challenged another assumption. Maybe this wasn't just a toy. Maybe this wasn't just a golf cart. Maybe everyone, including me, had judged these little cars far too quickly. Without realizing it, the conversation had completely changed. Nobody was asking whether it looked funny anymore. Now everyone wanted to know something much more important. How could a car this cheap include all of these features? Of course, sitting inside a car is one thing. Driving it is another. If it couldn't survive real traffic, none of these discoveries would matter. So the next step was obvious. Take it onto the road. Because if this tiny electric car could actually drive like a normal car, then perhaps the biggest misunderstanding wasn't the vehicle itself. Perhaps the misunderstanding was everything hiding behind it. The next surprise didn't come from a factory. It came from an ordinary neighborhood. No flashing lights, no giant exhibition hall, no enthusiastic salespeople. just a woman who had been driving one of these tiny electric cars for the past 6 years. She wasn't showing it off. She wasn't making YouTube videos. She wasn't trying to convince anyone. She simply used it the way millions of people use their cars every single day. To go shopping, to visit family, to pick up children, to commute across town. Watching her quietly drive through familiar streets completely changed the way I looked at these vehicles. Outside China, many people judge them by what they aren't. They aren't fast, they aren't luxurious, they aren't exciting. But the people buying them weren't asking those questions. They were asking something much simpler. Can this get me where I need to go without costing me a fortune? That single question changes everything. For someone driving 10 or 15 kilometers each day, paying tens of thousands of dollars for a large electric SUV simply doesn't make sense. Most daily trips are surprisingly short. Buying groceries, taking children to school, going to work, visiting friends, running errands. The tiny Wuling wasn't trying to replace a Tesla, it wasn't trying to replace a BMW. It was replacing thousands of short trips that had never needed a large, expensive vehicle in the first place. Suddenly, the idea of a tiny electric car no longer seemed strange, it seemed logical. The real surprise wasn't that China built a small car. The real surprise was how many transportation problems could be solved without building a big one. That was the second belief to collapse. People weren't buying the cheapest car they could find. They were buying the simplest solution to a problem they faced every day. By now, two things had become clear. First, these weren't toy cars. Second, millions of ordinary people genuinely found them useful. So another question immediately appeared. If demand was real, how could manufacturers keep selling them at prices that seemed almost impossible? A modern electric car still needs a battery, an electric motor, electronics, steel, glass, seats, software, factories, workers. Every one of those things costs money. Yet somehow, companies across China kept producing vehicles that looked impossibly affordable. At first, I assumed there must be one company behind it, one giant manufacturer with an incredible cost advantage, but the exhibition told a very different story. There wasn't just one brand, there were dozens. Some built tiny city cars, others focused on delivery vehicles, some specialized in neighborhood transportation, others produced small commercial trucks, different logos, different designs, different prices. Yet the more I walked around, the more everything began to feel strangely connected. That was the moment I stopped looking at the cars. Instead, I started looking at what surrounded them: the batteries, the motors, the charging systems, the controllers, the suppliers, the companies that most visitors simply walked past without noticing. And that's when the investigation took an unexpected turn. Maybe the biggest story inside this exhibition wasn't sitting under the spotlights at all. Maybe it was hidden inside hundreds of booths selling parts that almost nobody stopped to photograph. Because if dozens of different brands could all build incredibly cheap electric vehicles, perhaps they weren't competing in the way I had imagined. Perhaps they were sharing something much bigger. And if that was true, then I wasn't really investigating cheap cars anymore. I was about to step inside the industrial system that made them possible. The next morning, I returned to the exhibition with a completely different mindset. The cars were no longer my destination. They had become my starting point. Instead of stopping at every colorful little EV, I began walking into the halls that many visitors ignored. There were no dramatic product launches here, no crowds gathering for test drives. Instead, booth after booth displayed electric motors, battery packs, controllers, charging systems, lightweight chassis, braking components, and manufacturing equipment. At first glance, they looked ordinary. But after seeing the same suppliers appear again and again across different brands, one realization slowly began to emerge. Maybe these companies weren't all building completely different cars. Maybe They were all building from the same industrial foundation. And if that was true, then the real product of this exhibition wasn't a $3,000 car. It was something far more powerful. The longer I walked through the exhibition, the stranger everything became. Different brands, different logos, different body styles, yet many of them seemed to share the same mechanical DNA. One supplier displayed electric motors that appeared in several different vehicles. Another specialized only in battery packs. A few booths away, another company produced controllers. Then came braking systems, charging modules, steel frames, plastic body panels. Every few minutes, another piece of the puzzle appeared. Instead of each company building an entire car from scratch, many were buying from the same network of suppliers. Imagine walking into a bakery where every shop sells different cakes, only to discover they all buy flour from the same mill, sugar from the same refinery, and chocolate from the same factory. Suddenly, the competition looks very different. They aren't reinventing everything. They're building on the same foundation. That realization completely changed the way I looked at these tiny vehicles. The cheapest part of building a car isn't always making the car. It's avoiding the need to invent everything yourself. And China has spent years building an ecosystem where thousands of specialized companies each become exceptionally good at doing just one thing. One company perfects batteries, another focuses only on motors, another develops electronic controllers, another stamps metal frames, another manufactures charging equipment. When every supplier becomes more efficient, every car manufacturer becomes more competitive. The improvement doesn't stay inside one company, it spreads across the entire ecosystem. That idea explains something many people outside China often misunderstand. They assume these cars are cheap simply because labor is cheaper. Labor certainly matters, but it doesn't explain everything. If low wages alone created competitive industries, dozens of countries would already dominate electric vehicle production. Instead, what stood out inside the exhibition was something much more difficult to build: density. Within a relatively small area, suppliers, factories, engineers, logistics companies, and manufacturers were all connected. A battery supplier could deliver components within hours instead of weeks. A manufacturer could redesign a part without waiting months for overseas shipments. Engineers from different companies often worked in the same industrial districts. Problems moved quickly, solutions moved even faster. Every improvement made the next company slightly more efficient. Every new supplier lowered costs for dozens of manufacturers. The ecosystem learned together. It evolved together. That is very different from one successful company building one successful product. This is an industrial network continuously making itself stronger. And perhaps that's why so many companies can afford to sell vehicles at prices that seem impossible elsewhere. The cheap car isn't the beginning of the story. It's the final result. The real story begins much earlier, inside thousands of suppliers that most consumers will never know exist. Standing there, surrounded by motors, batteries, and manufacturing equipment, another belief quietly disappeared. I had started this journey believing China was simply building cheap electric cars. Now that explanation felt far too simple. China wasn't just producing vehicles, it was producing manufacturing capability. Every supplier reduced costs, every factory improved production. Every new customer increased scale, and larger scale made the next generation of vehicles even cheaper. It was a cycle that constantly reinforced itself. Suddenly, the tiny Wuling I had laughed at on the first day looked completely different. It wasn't an isolated product. It was the visible tip of an enormous industrial iceberg, which raised another question. If this manufacturing ecosystem is so effective, why don't other countries simply copy it? To answer that question, I followed one tiny Chinese electric car far beyond the exhibition hall. This time, the destination wasn't another factory, it was America. On paper, the idea seemed incredibly simple. Find a $3,000 electric car in China, buy it, ship it overseas, drive away with one of the cheapest electric cars in the world. At first, everything looked surprisingly easy. The car could be ordered online. Paperwork seemed straightforward. Shipping companies were available. For a brief moment, it almost felt like anyone could do it. But that confidence didn't last very long. Because once the little car left the factory, an entirely different system began taking over. And that system would prove to be every bit as important as the one that built the car in the first place. The first surprise wasn't the shipping cost, it was how many people suddenly became part of the journey. The manufacturer, the export agent, the freight company, the shipping line, the customs broker, the inspection office, the port authority, the warehouse, the trucking company, the insurance provider. One by one, every step added another layer of cost. The car itself never changed. It was still the same tiny Wuling that had quietly driven through city streets in China, but every border it crossed made it more expensive. Ocean freight, port handling fees, customs clearance, storage charges, safety inspections, registration requirements, import duties, and finally, tariffs. A car that looked unbelievably cheap inside China no longer looked cheap after traveling halfway around the world. Not because someone had redesigned it, not because someone had improved it, but because it had entered an entirely different industrial and regulatory environment. For years, many people assumed the only reason Chinese cars were cheap was lower production costs. Now, another reality became impossible to ignore. Building a car and delivering a car are two completely different businesses. The vehicle wasn't becoming expensive, the journey was. At this point, another common assumption quietly disappeared. Many people ask a simple question. If China can build a $3,000 electric car, why doesn't America just import millions of them? On the surface, that sounds perfectly reasonable until you follow the entire journey. Importing isn't simply buying a product, it's entering another country's legal system, safety standards, certification, insurance requirements, dealer networks, replacement parts, service infrastructure, consumer protection. Every country builds its own rules around its own transportation system. Those rules don't necessarily make a vehicle better or worse, but they do make moving products across borders much more complicated than most people imagine. That explains why copying a product is often much easier than copying the system that produced it. You can buy one tiny electric car. You cannot buy decades of supplier relationships overnight. You can import a battery. You cannot instantly recreate an industrial cluster. Factories can be built. Machines can be purchased, but ecosystems grow much more slowly. And that realization led to perhaps the biggest discovery of this entire investigation. Maybe the world's automotive competition isn't changing because one company builds a better car. Maybe it's changing because one ecosystem keeps making every company inside it a little stronger every single year. Standing at the port, watching containers disappear toward ships bound for overseas markets, I realized I had been asking the wrong question from the very beginning. I came here asking how China could build a cheap electric car. Now that question felt almost irrelevant. The far more important question was this: what kind of industrial ecosystem can continuously make thousands of companies more competitive at the same time? Because if that question matters, then the tiny Wuling was never the destination. It was simply the first clue. When people talk about the global car industry, the conversation usually sounds familiar. Tesla versus BYD, Ford versus Toyota, Volkswagen versus Hyundai, company versus company, brand versus brand, model versus model. That has been the way we have understood the automotive business for generations. But after following this little electric car from exhibition halls to neighborhoods, from suppliers to ports, that picture no longer seemed complete. Because everywhere I looked, I found connections. Battery companies improving motor manufacturers, motor manufacturers helping vehicle builders, shared suppliers lowering costs for dozens of brands at once, factories learning from one another, industrial parks concentrating hundreds of specialized businesses within the same region. The success of one company increasingly strengthened many others. Competition still existed, but cooperation inside the ecosystem was equally powerful. At first glance, the product appears to be a tiny electric car. Look closer, and the product becomes something else: a manufacturing network, a supply chain that can react quickly, suppliers that constantly reduce costs, factories that can rapidly adjust production, engineers solving problems only a few kilometers away from the companies that need those solutions. Every improvement spreads across the network. The next vehicle becomes cheaper, the next supplier becomes stronger, the next factory becomes more efficient. That cycle repeats again and again and again. The tiny Wuling sitting quietly in the exhibition hall wasn't remarkable because of its size. It was remarkable because it revealed the existence of a much larger machine operating behind it. When this journey began, I thought the biggest story was a $3,000 electric car. I was wrong. The biggest story wasn't the price, it wasn't the battery, it wasn't even the vehicle. The biggest story was the industrial system capable of producing millions of products that continuously become better, cheaper, and faster to manufacture. People often describe the future of the automotive industry as a battle between companies. After this investigation, that explanation feels incomplete. Increasingly, the real competition looks like something much larger. Not Tesla versus BYD, not Ford versus Toyota, but one industrial ecosystem competing against another. And ecosystems are much harder to copy than products. At the beginning of this journey, I laughed at a tiny electric car. Looking back, I don't think the little car was ever the joke. It simply challenged assumptions that many of us had never questioned. Sometimes the biggest changes don't arrive wrapped in luxury. They don't appear first as expensive flagships or revolutionary supercars. Sometimes they arrive quietly, small enough to be ignored, cheap enough to be dismissed, simple enough to be underestimated. The tiny Wuling may never become the world's most desirable car. That isn't its job. Its real purpose may be something much more important: to reveal an industrial system that has spent years learning how to make transportation more affordable, one supplier, one factory, and one vehicle at a time. History has a habit of hiding major transformations inside ordinary objects. The Model T wasn't just a car. The shipping container wasn't just a steel box. The smartphone wasn't just another phone. And perhaps this tiny electric car isn't simply another cheap vehicle. Perhaps it's the easiest place to see a much bigger story already reshaping the future of manufacturing.